Alright guys, here's your tip of the week. You hear me talking all the time about community scrapes. And I get asked constantly, how do they tell if it's a community scrape? Well, let's break this down a little bit. Generally, I consider there to be three types of scrapes. Community scrape, a rut scrape, and a frustration scrape. So, let me tell you how this works. A frustration scrape is just the kind of scrapes you'll find. Sometimes they're under overhanging branches, sometimes they're not. They're generally found in a staging area where the deer are getting antsy because the buck wants to go out in the field and find the does, or out into an open cut and find the does, but it's not dark enough yet for him to go, so he's getting all aggravated, and he'll make these little scrapes just because he's getting ticked off. That's what I call a frustration scrape. A rut scrape is a scrape that you'll generally find in doe bedding areas, around trails that does are using. They'll be under an overhanging branch, and it's just a buck going along. He's going to make a scrape. He's going to use it maybe once, never again, and then he's going to move on. It's a good indicator that there's a buck in the area chasing does, but it's not something you want to hunt on because it's just small, single time the use. It's going to be a small scrape, usually under one overhanging branch. So I'm going to show you the difference between a community scrape and those other two I just talked about, and there's a huge difference. So here we go. This community scrape is important to me because this is the one that I was getting freeze frame on every 3 days. I had odd job on it during October, and I had about 9 other bucks in October using this scrape. It's a scrape that's in the junction of about 4 or 5 different trails that pass through here. It's an advertisement. It's social media for deer. It's them saying, hey, here I am, and this is what I'm doing. So, first thing you're going to notice with a community scrape is the scrape itself on the ground. It's going to be very big. It's going to be as big enough for a 6-foot guy sometimes to be able to lay in and not get all the way across. Not always, especially if it's a newer one, but if it's an established community scrape that they've been using for any amount of time, it's going to have a very large bowl that they've been using. So let's show you that. Alright, so here we are. Here's our community scrape bowl. And you can see the ridge right here. It goes around, comes down like this, and it comes all out to here. In all, it's probably about 8 feet long. And you can see in here, it's all dug up. All this dirt is dug up. You can see the roots coming out over here. There's not a whole lot of vegetation in here. It's being used, but this one's not being used real heavy. You can see all the dirt that's kicked out in all different directions in here. It's a big wash bowl like this. Now, you'll have your main scrape that will be in the bottom of it. And then you'll also notice you'll start getting little satellite scrapes all around it too. Generally from smaller bucks when there's multiples. They're just in here doing all kinds of crazy stuff and scraping and hitting these licking branches and everything else. Now you also see in here that this one's being used because we have deer tracks right here, have a nice one here, there, there's a couple more over here, some there. So this is an active scrape. That's how you can tell, is you're going to find fresh sign in it. Sometimes there'll be droppings in it. Sometimes you'll even find wet urine in it when you come up to them, so you'll know they're being used. They start using these in May, and they stop using them somewhere once the snow flies. And sometimes even after the snow flies, they're still going to hit them. They'll always use a licking branch. They may not scrape. The way they hit them is generally what I notice is they come in and they hit the licking branch first, and then they urinate. And the does will squat down and urinate. The bucks will urinate. During the rut, they're going to urinate onto their tarsal glands, and it's going to go in. But you'll notice that during the summertime and spring when they pee in that scrape, they're not doing that. They're not squatting and putting their tarsals together, how they clamp their legs together and pee. They're not doing that. They're just peeing. So the most important part of any community scrape is the overhanging branch, because they use that all the time and they use the scrape most of the time. So let's show you overhanging branches and what's the difference between that and a rut scrape. A rut scrape is going to have generally just one branch on it. No other branches. It's just going to be one little branch. Could be a beech, could be an oak, could be anything that they're using. Here in my area, they like using hemlock. So this is a big hemlock tree. You can see it's a pretty good sized tree there. And then you have all these lower branches hanging down. And you're going to start seeing a lot of activity on them here. You're going to see broken, historically broken off branches. You're going to notice nipped off tips. And we have this one here. This is a major licking branch here. It's all the bark is worn right off in it from rubbing, and you can kind of see rub marks on it from antlers in the past, and they've licked it and bit off the end. You'll see here there's old scar marks underneath from them rubbing. We'll come around this way. This one here, they've used this one. This is where their heads are hitting most of the time. In all the pictures I had, they're right in this piece here. You can see they've rubbed it so much they've killed that branch off. So there's no fronds left with any needles on them. That's all just beat up and used up. You can see scarring on that right there. And what they like this action. They like that bouncing action. They like to play with it, almost like a cat with a toy. You'll have a bunch of different branches here, and what I notice is even the does, they'll get up on their hind legs and they'll put their heads up in these branches, and they get up in there and they rub the whole thing. One of the cool things you'll see is that during the rut, they're generally in October, right in that pre-rut when they're really wound up, they'll get in here and the buck he'll hook this with his antlers and he'll pull it down and get it all caught in his antlers and thrash it. Last year, freeze frame broke off a bunch of branches here and they were scattered all on the ground. There was some really nice hanging branches in here that he broke off. So without this, it's not a community scrape. They like to have a lot of overhanging stuff to really play with. Just like I said, it's like a cat playing with a toy. So that would be the main difference between any other scrape. That, and they're going to hit this anytime they come down this trail, unless they're being pressured and pushed through. They're going to stop and they're going to urinate in this, and they're going to play with those overhanging branches. And I should caveat that they don't always urinate in them. I've seen a lot of deer just come in, hit the overhanging branch for a few seconds, and off they go. So, but they're always going to use those overhanging branches. That's the most important thing. So if you're going to set up a mock scrape and try to start your own community scrape, find a place where you have a number of trails coming together in a spot, and you have a hemlock, or some places they really like beech, that has a number of really cool overhanging branches. Take a stick, dig it out, put your Black Widow Extreme Interest or buck and doe pea in it, and then get some branch butter and stick it on those branches and thrash them off. Sometimes even if you're wearing gloves, you break off a tip so it looks like it's been bit off, so there's a licking branch started. You'll start your own community scrape. It doesn't always work. Let me caveat that for a second. It doesn't always work. But if you have a good number of bucks in the area that are aggressive, you have a lot of big older does, they will key in on that and they'll start using it because they want to find out who it was who made it. So there you go. There's your tip of the week. Go make a mock scrape. Go see Black Widow and get the stuff you need to do it. Talk to you later.